Welcome to the Embodied Revolution show with your host, Lora Coleman, founder of Embodied Revolution. This is a safe space to connect, grow, and rise into your highest embodiment with authentic identity. Twice a month, we dive deep into inspiring conversations, grounded strategies, and real life stories from women making bold moves aligned with their soul's purpose. So get ready for wisdom you can live, mindsets that transform, and the evidence that you too can rise stronger, wiser, and more in tune with your purpose. This is more than a show, it's a movement. Welcome to the Embodied Revolution. Hello, Denise, and welcome to Embodied Revolution show. Can you tell us, how do you pronounce your last name? Because I just want to make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah, no problem. It's Elysa, actually. And my actual name is Denise Askin, but everything I do has always been my middle name, Denise Elysa. So
Okay.
that's something most people don't know about me.
Okay, well, Denise Elysa, from Coming Home to Ourselves, tell us a little bit about why did you want to come on this show? What does embodiment mean to you? How does it speak to your brand?
Thank you. Embodiment is such a massive piece of the work that I do and also of my own healing journey and healing process. And so to me, embodiment is one of those words that you don't really understand until you experience it.
Mm,
Personally, is what I found. And it's it's more of like a felt sense. It's this place inside of yourself that you begin to naturally act from. So without conscious thought, without really working at it, this is the place that your body naturally acts from and guides you from. So within my work, this is all of the pieces of your healing, your processes, your, you know, trauma healing or clearing or the health recovery that you've experienced being integrated into your system to the point where you don't even have to think about it anymore. You're just acting from that place. It's like you've unbecome everything that you were conditioned to be, and you've reconnected with that core sense of who you are inside of yourself. And from there, there's just this different flow in how you walk through the world, how you naturally respond to things, how you kind of just like live your life, like your whole frequency changes.
all right, and I really like how you said reconnect with yourself from the inside, because that is what I stand for as well. It's a feeling of coming home to yourself, as what your name says. And whenever I first saw that, I was like, okay, I think this would be aligned, because that's exactly how I explain embodiment. It's almost like you're remembering who you are and you're coming back home, and then you feel that feeling of peace, but it's after, you learn how to let go of your limiting beliefs and things like that. So what is it that you do that helps women heal? Like, I know that I saw on your Instagram, it said from something to do with healing. So what exactly does it do that you help women heal from what and how?
So I guess in like the short form, I always struggle with that question because everybody's coming to me from a very different place, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm meeting them where they're at right now. So there's no like one set answer. And although I do have a system that I have curated to go through this process with people, those in like the intimate parts of those steps are going to be very individualized and personalized to where that person is right now, how they're showing up to me. But in like the short form,
Mhm.
I guess I would say that I help people who feel like disconnected or chronically unwell reconnect with themselves and increase their capacity and ultimately awaken their own inner healer without requiring like blood work and medical validation or overwhelming routines. Because a lot of the people who show up to me, this won't be the only type of person who I work with, but a lot of them have been really dismissed by the medical system and are living with some really severely debilitating, complex, chronic symptoms or diseases where their blood work looks normal, right?
Yeah.
So they're being dismissed by doctor after doctor after doctor. And if they're lucky enough, they might find one who can give them a diagnosis. But even once they receive that diagnosis, there's no clear path to healing. There's like symptom management, there's, support with disability applications because a lot of them end up being unable to work and unable to care for themselves. And so this is just a different path forward without some of those barriers that really gets to some of those ways of being inside of ourselves that have
Yeah.
contributed to us being susceptible to these illnesses in the first place, and really learning to reconnect with our body and create a felt sense of safety and listen to our bodies. And I always say that when we are not listening to our bodies and when we're living outside of alignment with who we truly are, our bodies are going to let us know. And if we can start listening to that early, then our bodies don't need to scream, right?
Right.
But if we don't, then our bodies get louder and louder and louder until we kind of get the message or we're forced to make changes.
So is it energy work that you work with?
Yeah. So
Okay.
okay, thanks for clarifying. So I work with intuitive energy healing. I work with somatic inquiry practices. I also utilize some other tools like past life regression and oracle cards and intuitive development. Discernment is a big one, intuitive discernment, and being able to really reconnect with what is true and what is just like noise.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and yeah, go ahead.
it sounds like, although you do have a history with working with people with conditions, with energy work and intuition and these things, you could just work with just any woman who wants to elevate her identity, anybody
Absolutely.
who wants to go back to her roots and see like how did her roots actually affect her life now? Is there some kind of embodiment block there that could also be mixed with the body? Is that
Yeah,
on
that's
par with what?
absolutely true. Yeah.
Okay. So I know you do a lot of intuition work, and like I'm very fascinated with the theory of women following their intuition versus not. I know we live in a very modern and logical world, and there is kind of like a hustle culture there that is, rooted in what society has told women. So, what is your take on women following their intuition, like on a scale of 1 to 10? How much do you feel like a woman should follow her intuition? And why do you feel like women have such a struggle with just letting their intuition lead the way?
I think that once a woman has really learned how to listen to their intuition, how to discern what is truth within their intuition and what is picking up other people's stuff, because there's a bit of a fine line there where when you're first opening up to your intuition, you're first awakening to some of these gifts that I really do believe we all innately have,
Mhm.
there can be this period of time where you're picking up a lot of junk, right? So my answer to like how often on a scale of 1 to 10 should a woman follow her intuition, it's a 10. But the
Yeah,
caveat there is learn how to do it safely first, right?
right.
So learn how to connect with your intuition in a really honoring and safe way, learn how to receive these messages and how to discern what is a message that is actually true or aligned or like coming from your highest self or source, however you want to put that. And what is it that you're just picking up gunk
Yeah,
from
that makes
other
sense.
people?
Yeah. That makes sense to me because I've never heard it said that way, but I always say like women come to me and they're like, "Well, how am I going to know that making that bold move is not going to lead to like destruction versus the bold move that is coming from your higher self that you do want to take and that fear is holding you back from? Like, how do you tell the difference?" And that's kind of the same thing as what you're saying because I kind of guide them to be like, "Well, if you work on listening to your inner core, your inner values first, that is what is going to guide you. And that's kind of your intuition as well. It's like, are we listening to our intuition or the pressures of society? It comes down to knowing yourself within, which is something that both of our uh, brands have in common.
I agree.
So, and I
And
know,
to address your question about like why do we have such a hard time
yeah,
following our intuition, I really think that that's something that's programmed into us from a really really early childhood development, right? This goes back to infancy. So
Mhm.
when we are children, and I'm, not me, just humans
Yeah,
as infants rely solely on their caregiver in order to survive. So there is a very strong survival mechanism that kicks in order to keep us safe. And
hmm,
so if we perceive that our caregiver needs us to be a certain way, to do a certain thing, to say something that they want to hear, etc., in order to stay connected, to stay fed, to stay loved, to stay sheltered, to stay safe, those are our survival needs that
right,
start to override that connection to our bodies and what we really know to be true for ourselves. And so
right.
it begins so young. And
Yeah.
then you layer on top of that all of the societal conditioning that you go through for your whole life, especially women with like the good girl mentality and that you
Mhm.
should always serve others before yourself. And there's so many layers to this, but I really do think it goes like all the way back to infancy.
Yeah, I just posted this today that a lot of people try to solve an issue with one surface level thing when really it's like so many more levels under that. And that is kind of like the mission here is like to uncover, unbury what those layers are. But no, I do agree that, a lot of the times our intuition gets pushed aside because we're listening to other things. And for me, like this is just my opinion. Sometimes I wonder, like, if the natives had it more figured out than what we give them credit for. But they were outside, they were walking on their ground, they were like, they were more in touch with their intuition. And now, as kind of what you're to go with what you're saying with modern day life, like the cities, the lights, like even like the lights are not the same. And most of the time, kids they spend most of the time under fluorescent lights, things like that. So I do think our intuition just keeps getting buried underneath. And also, when you think about it, older generations, and I'm just talking off the top of my head, but like when you think about the older generations, no harm to them, but they were living in a very different world than what we are now. Like right now, we are
Absolutely.
spreading messages just through the internet. And so I
Absolutely.
feel like the older generation can press some of those beliefs that's kind of like for a modern day woman, they might feel the intuitive nudge to go beyond something. And sometimes the older generation can sway them away from that, and that's kind of like you said, like could be a whole different podcast episode because of all the layers, as you're saying. But yeah, I feel like intuition is definitely something that women need to give more credit to
Yeah,
and know that it's there for a reason.
I agree. I think that it really links back to our interoception and our neuroception as well, because our interoception is like our connection with our felt senses, like things that are going on in our body. And how often does it come down to like simple things like you know that you have to go pee but you ignore it because you just want to finish this email, or you know that you're hungry or thirsty but you ignore it
Mhm.
because you're busy doing this other thing, right? So we're taught so early to ignore those internal cues. And then neuroception is actually like our external antennae of, am I safe? And
Mhm.
so for many people, they've been raised in like maybe not the most grounded environments. Like, so there's obviously a big spectrum here from just kind of like not very attuned environments to like heavily traumatic environments. But
Right.
if we live most of our lives or a lot of our developmental lives in chaos, our body cues safety to chaos. right? So
Mhm.
our
Yeah.
body is always going to choose, and our mind is always going to choose that familiar discomfort
Mhm.
over like the discomfort of something new, even if it's safe. So you choose the
Right.
familiar chaos over the unfamiliar calm. So these are a lot of the different layers that come into really connecting with your intuition and being able to discern it accurately, because you have all of these different nervous system pieces in your body. We're not just an
Right.
energy body, right? We're a whole physical body as
Yeah.
well
How can we
that
get our
all comes
nervous
into play.
system on board with this healing? And what do you feel like? What is your take on how feelings actually play a role in this? Because I'm listening to what you're saying about, people with chaotic backgrounds, and I'm a cycle breaker in my family, so I came from a very chaotic background. And I know that, for example, the way that the human brain works is that I have some relatives who they have trouble feeling their feelings because of survival mode. So because of the chaotic upbringing and things that happen, they shut down their feelings because survival came first. And even now, as an adult, they cannot feel feelings as what a normal person would. And I feel like that gets in the way of nervous system work, of, somatic work, of the body. Being as like, I consider you an expert on the body internally. Would that be something that would be a huge block of like how that would affect? Like, could that lead to medical issues in
So
your world?
yeah. So to answer your first question, like, is that the block? No, that's the work,
Yeah.
right? Like you've named it, right? That's exactly what the work is because that's so common, right? It's so, and we all go through stages throughout our day, throughout our life, where we're going, into fight flight, into freeze, kind of back through fight flight, back into a regulated state and a state of connection. So it's normal to go through those different states. But what we want is to be able to return to that sense of safety. So we
Mm,
want the flexibility in the nervous system and the resiliency in the nervous system so that we can move through those states instead of getting stuck on one.
yeah.
So, what you're referring to is where people get stuck into that like freeze state or that shutdown
Mhm.
state where, our bodies are really incredible, intelligent beings. Like, if something is too scary, too much, like too big in that moment, we go into freeze. It starts to disconnect us so that we can keep ourselves safe. And
Right.
so, to answer your second question, absolutely, that can lead to disease and illness and
Yeah.
a lot of problems down the line. And I would say that it did for me, right? I'm speaking from personal experience as well.
And that's what I was going to ask you next is what did happen to you? Like a summary of where did this all begin for you, of like your transformation, of how you shifted beyond like where you were, and kind of tell us, summarize where you were versus, what changed for you.
Oh, that's such a big, how much time do you have?
And I was like,
um,
you might have to summarize it,
I
but
know. That's such a
you
big question. So, I mean, people can learn more about this, about me, like on my website and through my social media channels and stuff like that, because I definitely can't summarize it all in one go. But I would say that for myself, there's layers that came from early childhood, there's layers that came from like my teen years when I hit my first really severe burnout, like
mm,
hospitalization level burnout, multiple misdiagnoses. And then fast forward through like my later teen years and early 20s, and there was some significant trauma involved. And eventually my body just totally collapsed, right? It just completely gave out. And eventually, after like couple of years of like your blood work is normal and I'm going, but I'm 24 years old and I'm losing neurological function and I'm
mm,
almost bedridden. um Eventually I was diagnosed with Lyme disease and co-infections, multiple different pieces there. I went through some really intense medical treatment for quite a few years and traveling across provinces to have my blood work read accurately because I couldn't find anyone local to me that was actually in the medical system to help me. Sending my blood to like Germany and New York and New Jersey and all these, I'm in Canada, by the way.
Okay.
So all over the place to receive answers. Eventually, at 28 years old, I was in suspected remission. And throughout that time, I had already begun this process of like awakening to energy healing and intuition and
Yeah.
kind of awakening that self-healer within. I had started taking courses on energy healing and intuitive development and all of that. And then 2020 hit and
Uh,
everything got shut down.
yeah.
I was pregnant. My business was one of the first ones to get like shut down right away. I I really didn't know how I was going to survive like financially with being pregnant, with having my business shut down, with we're in the middle of this pandemic. We don't know when we're going to be back to business. We don't know any of these pieces. And there was some really massive transitions happening in my life alongside of those. And so during my pregnancy, my health started to really decline again. I was considered relapsed. And by 2023, I was completely bedridden, unable to eat or speak, and reliant on a wheelchair.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay. So you
yeah,
were actually in a wheelchair before, but now you're
I
like, what
haven't
is
used
your
it
health
since
status?
I haven't used it since July.
Okay.
July? Yeah, so about 6 months, I guess, since I've
Okay.
used it. And to clarify, like I was an ambulatory wheelchair user, so I was I didn't use it around the house when I was just kind of walking on one floor, but I was also
Yeah.
mostly, homebound, bedbound, things like that.
Right.
But for outings, walks, like even just to take my kid to the park, like we have a park that's like 10 houses away from us and I couldn't get there.
Yeah, which brings the importance up for other people, not even women, but like other people who, if the world is telling you, oh, you're fine, you this, you that, like if you know somewhere like that you need to figure stuff out, like there's something else going on, that you can be the one to go figure out, okay, what does work for me,
Yeah.
because maybe those things in your environment don't work for you, and you have the power to create, your environment in a way. And I know that we talked a little bit before on email, and I'm just saying that because people listening might not know. And I did have a question for you, just because, so as I've stated before, that I've come from like a chaotic background as well. And I always feel like I'm walking the line between like, that is part of my story, but I don't want it to define me. And whenever I first heard about your story, I kind of started thinking about that. You're very transparent in the battles that you went through, like lupus, and the conditions that you've had to better tell your story. So, what are your beliefs on victim mentality? Because I know for me, it's been a lot of like, people will tell me, oh, like you don't want to seem like the victim. If you seem like the victim and say these things from your past, which at this point I've already said everything, but people would tell me, if you say these things, like you're going to be playing the victim, like playing the victim card. So, like, how do you see that? Like, how can people tell their story without playing into victim mentality? Like, what is the differences there for you?
Sure, yeah. First, I just want to clarify, I actually didn't have lupus.
Oh,
I have been
sorry.
tested for lupus, but I was never diagnosed
Okay.
with it. So my conditions were like Lyme disease and co-infections, but
Oh,
in like the chronic extended state, like the not like I got bit by a tick and I got treated right away and I was fine, right? This was
yeah.
like it went missed for so long. And then from there, it was myalgic encephalomyelitis with mast cell activation syndrome and POTS, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, endometriosis, multiple pain conditions. There's a lot. It's a long
Yeah.
list. I
Okay.
did get lucky and find an internal medicine doctor here locally eventually who would treat, do symptom management for the latter part of those symptoms, but not for like the Lyme disease and co-infections. But there are doctors out there, is what I'm saying. And he actually did end up contracting me out to work for him, doing energy healing and meditation for his
Oh,
patients who
cool.
live with these complex chronic diseases and long COVID and these incurable illnesses. So my point there is that sometimes you get lucky, like eventually, right? But most of us have to see so many specialists before we get there. And even when we do, you know, the, there's no cure in the medical system's lens, right?
Right.
So that is just kind of a sensitive thing to navigate. But I just wanted to clarify the diagnosis is there for your listeners. But
Yeah,
back to your
thank you. 'Cause,
victim.
like,
Yeah,
I don't want to say something you had that I don't
that's
know why
okay.
I thought you had
No
that.
problem. But back to your victim mentality question, I think that's such a powerful question, a really good question. I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with. I know it's something that I have struggled with in basically exactly what you just said. Like, how do I share my story without sounding like a victim, feeling like a victim, being perceived as a victim? Um, and I've been through that multiple times in many different layers. But I guess what I'll say is that sometimes we really are victims, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes you go through a really traumatic event and you are a victim. And the difference to me is that victim mentality is that we are always the victim and it completely voids all sense of self responsibility. So, in my experience, like I can come up with all of the different reasons and lifestyle pieces and limiting beliefs and energetic blockages and ways of thinking and being that promoted me to get sick, like that contributed to me becoming so unwell, a lack of boundaries, a need to please people, like all of these different things that we know can contribute to illness. But it's not my fault that I got sick, right? It's not my
Right.
fault that I didn't have the support that I needed. It's not my fault that I couldn't access effective or safe medical care. It's not my fault that going to a hospital feels life threatening because they don't understand my conditions, right? But that doesn't negate my responsibility for my life. So
Right.
while these pieces were not my fault and remain like not my fault, where in them can I take responsibility? Because how I choose to live and build my life and how I choose to move from the position that I'm in and the circumstances that I am in, that is my responsibility.
Mhm.
So I guess to me, like that's the difference. I don't know how that lands for you.
No, like that reminds me of similar things that I say, even though I have not dealt with medical conditions. That's what I was like, okay, this is a different take. But I do believe like we are responsible for our own healing in a way.
Yeah.
But I do like what you said because that helps other people with conditions listening right now, just being like, okay, so the way that I kind of took it, coming from like someone who doesn't have medical conditions, was almost in a way like, can we not villainize just being a victim and like accepting like some of the things that happen to us that we have no control over? But it's really that mentality piece, like just that one word, as you stated, changes everything. It's like victim mentality. When you're looking at the word mentality, that means how are you reacting to it? How are you, coping with it? And like, what are you doing with that story? Because for you, if you were just like victim only, it would be like you just would still be in the bed and like saying like, well, I have this, I have that, like I can't do this and that. But like your mentality is stronger because yes, you took that story and you shared it with everyone, but you're now using it to heal other people and let other people know that you are someone that they can come to when maybe everyone else is saying, oh, like your blood work is fine. Like you are a reliable person that women can come to, and you're going to say, okay, here's what we can do. Let's try this. Let's try that. and like so much knowledge that you've gained from that mentality piece. So I really like that take of just comparing the victim part to victim mentality, because one is empowering and one is not so empowering,
So
for lack of a better
disempowering. And,
term.
and one of the big pieces here is that so many people who have, who live with these types of medical conditions or any medical condition, or even to go so far as like to say like a clear assault victim, so many of us are told that it's our fault,
Mhm.
right? And there's so much blame placed on us. And so that's where to me, there's this like, there's so many layers to it, because there shouldn't be, in my opinion, this blame on the victim, right? Or on
Mhm.
someone who has, just entered these like really challenging circumstances for whatever reason it is. And what are they going to do from there?
Mhm. Like,
Right?
not letting it control everything, like, not letting a diagnosis control everything. Is that how you
Yeah, and
feel, or
it's not about like pushing through the diagnosis or like,
right,
we have to honor our body's needs where they're at. We have to honor
right,
how sick we are when we're that sick. We have to honor the processes that come after a big assault or, something like that. But how are we going to move through that? How are we going
yeah,
to honor that? Are we going to allow ourselves to truly be with that in the way that is called for, and then move through? What do we do next?
and really,
Right?
like, what can you do? Sometimes it's even like, what can you do? Maybe it's just getting out of bed and
Totally.
putting some clothes. And if that's
Sometimes
where you are, and if that's a victory because of whatever or thing that you're going through, it's
I'm
like, okay, that
I'm going
was
to
your
put a
victory.
different
Like,
spin on that. Sometimes it's staying in bed.
yeah, if you
Sometimes
need
it's
rest, like,
honoring the fact that your body needs aggressive rest right now, and
yeah.
honoring whatever timeline that might take, even though it feels torturous. Like for me, I was a big workaholic. My coping mechanisms were working and exercising.
Mhm.
Like, and so the first time that I got sick, I could no longer do either of those things in the way that I was used to do them. And I was left with like no coping mechanisms left. Right.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that big self responsibility move is clearing your calendar, is
Mhm.
delegating, is entering that aggressive rest and allowing your body to get what it needs.
Mhm.
Right? So it's not always about doing more.
Yeah, sometimes it's just like, what's best for you, and how can you make that in a peaceful way? Like, how
Yeah.
can you do it in a peaceful way? How can you rest in a loving way? How can you be gentle with yourself if it is resting and in your mind you should be working?
Yeah.
Which is just like, I already know we could just talk about all
I
like the
know.
different layers of society with that. But yeah, it's just like, what's best for you and how can you find peace with that? And I also, well, not also, but I actually have a stepdaughter in a wheelchair. She
Mm.
has a disease, a mitochondrial disease. It's a very rare disease. So she's nonverbal and she relies on a wheelchair,
Wow.
um, everything like that. So, like, sometimes, and like, I'm speaking from like an earlier version of myself whenever I first actually like met her when she was younger. But kind of like, what would you say to people who, I'm just going to speak as like an older version of myself, but like, I would have looked at your site and looked at your work before I was in the mindset and just kind of been thinking like, okay, well, what about the people who can't do anything about it? Like, literally can't do anything about it. Like, I know some people can, but in some situations, such as the one I'm talking about, like, literally can't do anything about it. Like, there's no muscle tone, there's no anything. Like, what would you say to like someone with that debate of like, okay, well, what about these conditions that's literally like nonverbal, not anything like what would be your advice to like their families or them to still live an empowering, fulfilling life as much as what makes sense using like what you know?
I think that there's a lot of nuance to this question because it depends on, is this person a child? Are they an adult? Like, am I talking to that person themselves or am I talking to their families? Am
Yeah,
I supporting a parent who's trying to learn how to communicate with a nonverbal child or a non-speaking child? Or am I like speaking to that person themselves? Right. So I think that
yeah,
there's a lot of different nuance that comes in depending on the person. What I
yeah.
will say is that my perspective is that children, especially, come into our lives to bring about great change and healing. So I would start to get curious about like the parent's nervous system, the family
Mhm.
nervous system, right? Because when we're a family unit, there's like it's
Yeah.
almost has its own nervous system. I'd start to get curious about that. I would explore, first of all, like how are the caregivers taking care of themselves? How are they coping? What do they need in order to
Yeah.
not burn out? Because that was a big piece of my story, right? Caregiver burnout.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but also, I personally feel like non-speaking individuals still communicate in different ways. And
Mhm.
so for me, it would be a bit of an exploration around how can we connect with this person to honor their autonomy, to honor them as as a whole human
Yeah.
being. And
What are
just
those
because they're
signs?
non-speaking doesn't
Yeah.
mean that they're not intelligent, doesn't mean that they're not there,
Yeah,
right?
I wish like more people did really realize that because, and I'm speaking from my own experience. Like I said, my stepdaughter is nonverbal and in a wheelchair, but like she is very smart. Like she's like probably higher in literature than I am, things like that. But I do like what you said as far as making a peaceful environment. Like even though we can't do anything about certain situations, certain things that we'll never be able to do, like we'll never be able to change certain things, but we can create a peaceful environment. We can include her. We can.
To
Right now,
me,
she's obsessed with Gilmore Girls, and we just watch Gilmore Girls. Like that's all we watch is Gilmore Girls. So like, kind of just small stuff like that, you
for
know.
myself, the way that I look at things that truly cannot be changed, either like circumstantially or long term, is
Mhm.
how can we shift our experience of this,
Right.
right? I couldn't change the fact that I was bedridden, unable to speak or eat. How can I change my experience of that period of time in my life? Now, I realize that that's not the same situation because I didn't know how long that would last. But by the way, I'm not sure what your stepdaughter lives with, but myalgic encephalomyelitis, it is a mitochondrial based
Okay. Yeah.
disease as
So
well.
energy, like, yeah.
Yeah. So, um, yeah, so I would just start to look at like how can I shift my experience or how can I support this client or guest or family in experiencing their lives differently, even if the circumstances are not able to be changed at this time. And
Right.
when we start to work through those layers, it's really incredible the shifts that actually do take place
Yeah,
that,
because there's
are
more.
often miraculous or unexpected.
Yeah, there's more than one version of healing.
Yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
kind of what it makes me think of. And if anything, it'd be another reason for people to come to you because, like you're saying, it would take like a specific, and that's what I always say to like about everyone. It's like, well, it would take a deep dive into like your actual situation, which is just kind of like a battle we have to face on like Zoom calls and stuff. But yeah, like that would definitely be a reason for someone else to reach out to you so you can get a better story of where they're coming from.
Yeah.
So um, if you could choose, like just one, which I know would be hard for you, but if you could choose like one biggest lesson that you could tell somebody, like, and this was just, you didn't have time to tell them something, but you just could tell them this one thing,
Okay.
what would that thing be?
So I don't have time to teach them. I just have to tell them one
Yeah, you
thing.
just have to like tell
Okay.
them one
Okay.
thing, like your biggest lesson or takeaway.
It would be that pushing through is not the answer.
Mm,
Pushing harder is not going to bring you like the outcome that you think it's going to be. So our
yeah,
answers tend to come in like softness and stillness. Our sensitivity is not this awful thing that we've been taught that it is. And when we are constantly trying to like push harder or push through, we end up often like fighting against ourselves internally. And so it creates a lot more damage than the positive results that they were going to that they're hoping for, right? If
yeah.
I did have time to teach somebody something, I
Mhm.
would teach them that the body speaks, that the different symptoms, how they show up, where they show up is all language. So
Yeah.
that's the other piece, but obviously that would take, more intimate time
Yeah,
together.
but I thought you could like mix those two things together to still tell them one thing. So we'll just say you told them one thing. But it does remind me of this phrase, and I don't know if I'm gonna say it like exactly correctly because I listened to a lot of podcasts. But I heard this on a podcast, and it's reminding me of this conversation. It was something like, at first, the body will hit you with a rock, then it'll hit you with a brick, and
And
then
then
if
the
you
bus.
don't listen, it'll hit you with a bus or a
Yeah.
truck.
My
And I was
teacher,
like,
one
I
of
heard that and I was like, I would never even though I just said I might not say it exactly correct, but I was like, and I remember my husband was going through something. I was like, oh my God, like this was his brick or whatever. Like he needs to go through XYZ. Like that's exactly what, like, do you feel like that is like, can you elaborate on that? Like, do you agree?
Yeah, oh yeah, I totally agree. And I see it in my own life and I see it
Yeah,
in other people's lives all the time. And I
me
actually
too.
one of my teachers who I went through the somatic reconditioning practitioners certification with, Ryan Rose Evans, this is a piece that he teaches us in that training course as
Yeah,
well,
'cause
is
it's true.
the brick, the rock, the brick, the bus.
Yeah.
And so I do think that it shows up pretty clearly when you start, connecting with that analogy and actually looking at your life. So there's, I think he actually calls it like the feather, the brick, the bus, or something
It
like
might
that.
have
But
been a feather, but like,
yeah. So,
I
anyways,
remember.
the idea though is that there's a small thing. There's like a tickle, a whisper. There's,
Mhm.
your body is kind of starting to whisper to you, "Hey, this isn't working," right? And that might show up in kind of quieter ways. And you ignore it because it's often very inconvenient to follow those whispers or those nudges, right? So then the brick is like the brick comes through your window and that's something that's bigger, but it's not so big that you can't set it aside, right?
Mhm.
It's bigger, it's intrusive, but you just keep like patching up the window and like piling up these bricks, right? And then
Yeah.
the bricks are like ceiling high and you can't see out the window anymore. And then you're hit by the bus, and the bus
It's like
is
burnout,
I'm
like, and
bedridden. I
yeah,
can't speak or eat. I, you know, I suddenly physically truly cannot show up
yeah,
and do the thing that I was like pushing through to do.
yeah,
Right. And so, I mean, that can show up in different ways. For some people, it's like big financial loss or circumstances. Sometimes it's like actually a physical loss. And other times it's cancer, it's the
yeah,
bedriddenness, it's the wheelchair, it's.
yeah. And it's even like reminds me of intuition wise too. I know we had already talked about this a long time ago, but intuition wise, it's like, I see a lot of people, like for a real world example, a woman with somebody, their partner, and they're like see things happening that's not aligned, and they're kind of like that's their feeling. They're like, oh no, and they're like, then some more stuff happens, and it's not even necessarily the person is bad, but it's like not aligned to them, and then like they move in and then it's like, the brick where it's like these things are happening. And it's like just in my field, like for embodiment, I guess I'm speaking on the embodiment part of like things that are just not aligned and you're still pushing it aside because you already did this, you already said it, and because these women are doing it, so you're doing it, and then you're hit with the bus or the truck after, where it's like because you didn't listen to your own inner knowing before, and now you're in this situation as far as embodiment things of like now you're in, this worse situation, this DEBT debt situation or whatever, because you didn't listen to your inner self, which I think is just two versions of listening to your inner world.
For
So
sure.
I am going to be wrapping up because we've been talking for the time limit, which is good. But I wanted to come back to your name, coming home to yourself or ourselves. Is it yourself or ourselves?
Coming Home to Ourselves is
Okay.
my podcast name. And then on my website, I have like Coming Home to Yourself, just as like, what does this mean?
Yeah, and
So
that's what embodiment feels like to me.
interchangeable.
Like I'm like just talk about embodiment all the time because I just feel like embodiment runs everything. Like
Yeah.
embodiment is all the things that will get us to our desires. But coming home to ourselves, can you quickly summarize? Because I feel like a lot of people's their issue with even manifesting and really stepping into their higher identity is they don't bring in the feeling part of it. Can you kind of summarize? That sounds crazy, but you get what I'm saying.
I do.
Um,
I see it all the
but
time.
can you, and like it really is, and it's like people don't realize it, and it like just takes a little bit of work, and they're like, oh my God, you're right. But can you kind of like summarize how would somebody know, do you feel like how would someone know that they have come home to themselves? Like, what would it feel like?
To me, it feels like this felt sense of being anchored into who you are. And so sometimes it's one of those things where it's less of like a felt sense and more of a you're moving through life and you're noticing that you feel different when you do things that would have scared you before, that would have made you really
Mhm.
uncomfortable before. So let's put it as an example of like a big people pleaser or somebody who really struggles with boundaries. When someone really struggles with boundaries or with people pleasing, they are incredibly uncomfortable setting the boundaries that they need to set or saying no or not telling someone what they think they want to hear, things like that. So
Yeah.
the discomfort of making this other person uncomfortable is greater than what they can tolerate. So
Mhm.
for somebody who's in a situation like that, if they have like come home to themselves, they're going to notice, oh, I set that boundary and I felt safe. I felt good about it. I felt this deep inner knowing that that was the right thing to do in that moment. And that no matter what this other person's discomfort is, I can hold myself through it. I am
Yeah.
safe. I am anchored, right? So it is this felt sense of being like really anchored into your core and into kind of like the root of who you are. But I find that is a hard thing for people to kind of like conceptualize or understand if they
Yeah.
haven't experienced it. So that's why I like kind of more of the analogy piece, because I feel like that's something people can kind of relate to if they haven't experienced it yet.
Yeah. And that's why I brought up that question because it is hard to describe. And it is something that you kind of just have to go on like your own journey, I feel like, to get there. And same thing for me, like I feel like when you're stepping more into your true embodiment, like your true purpose led, like my brain is all about purpose led, not like embodiment as far as like what you're gonna have or own or whatever. It's just like internally for me, it's like just the most genuine feeling of knowing. And like you don't
Yeah.
even need to, like no one else needs to understand it.
Yep.
Like you just know. Like that's that's the
That I
best
feel
way
like
I
is
can
the
explain
biggest
it.
key actually, is nobody else needs to understand
Yeah,
it.
like you just have a deep sense of like this is what I was meant to do. like everything
Absolutely.
makes sense. Like it feels like a fog lifting. Like it feels like
Yeah.
like
And you nailed it.
empowerment. And really, like I feel like this is something else that you may only understand if you've been through your own self journey. It's like it feels like empowerment instead of like just power. And I feel like a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
it's power, but what we're talking about is like a personal empowerment, which like just hits different in the chest.
Absolutely. And it
So
comes from a very different place as well. Like there's a very different frequency to me between power and empowerment,
yeah, like
right?
that's
Like
what,
that's very different.
yeah. Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today, but I'm so glad you were able to come on the show. We'll drop all of your links.
Thank
Um,
you.
and I'm obsessed with you. I'm gonna have to go look up all your stuff because I know like we could just talk about like one thing for the whole
Oh
hour,
my
which
gosh. Thank you
is
so much for
such a
having
bonus.
me.
But yeah, everyone go check her out. We're gonna drop her links and we'll close you off with this quick message. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Embodied Revolution show. I'm so grateful that you're here, and I hope today's conversation really inspired you to step deeper into your own highest embodiment. If you loved what you heard, please take a moment to like, share, and follow. It's the best way to stay connected and be the first to know when new episodes drop. Until next time, keep rising, keep shining, and keep living from your soul's purpose.